The speaker's presentation is third in the panel, and lunch is not nearly close enough. You reach compulsively for your phone, open your favourite time-wasting app, and split your attention between the real and the real. The screen displays 2 or even 3 separate videos in one, your attention split 4 or 5 ways, the soothing wave of digital anesthesia washing over you. This hypothetical speaks to the transformation of electronic screens into what Cory Doctorow calls the ecosystem of interruption technologies, an end result to Marshall McLuhan's externalization of the nervous system, leading to the human cognitive state that Linda Stone describes as continuous partial attention. That, she suggests, leads to a compromised ability to reflect, to make decisions, and to think creatively. What does this milieu of continuous partial attention mean within the context of human temporal experience within the realm of the more than human, specifically at a time of ecological collapse? As the planet changes through anthropocentric means, so too does human cognition in response. As Rob Nixon states, over the past 2 decades, high-speed planetary modifications have been accompanied by rapid modifications to the human cortex, reprogramming by a digital world that threatens to overwhelm us into a state of perpetual distraction. This distraction is more worrying in the context of the very real ecological disaster that surrounds us. He concludes, in an age of degraded attention spans, it becomes doubly difficult, yet increasingly urgent, that we focus on the toll exacted over time by the slow violence of ecological degradation. An info-whelmed individual is aware of the degradation that surrounds them and the geotrauma it evokes, but is afflicted with, as Nixon suggests, the paradoxical disconnects that can accompany it. These disconnects have been compounded by various neoliberal and late liberal logics that have sought to distance ourselves from the more than human entanglements. The Care Collective draws from the mental health industry to evidence such a distancing, suggesting that over the past few decades, ideas of social welfare and community have been pushed aside for individualized notions of resilience, wellness, and self-improvement, promoted through ballooning self-care industry, which regulates care to something we are supposed to buy for ourselves on a personal basis. My research practice filters these concerns through the retroactivation of indigenous practices of British Druidry, to which I am native, and their processes of worlding, that Kathleen Stewart highlights as the effective nature of the world in which non-human agency, comprising of forms, rhythms, and refrains, reach a point of expressivity for an individual to develop a sense of legibility. In a contemporary age that masks the legibility and thus legitimacy of more than human entanglements, we can begin to close this gap with acts of attentive care. Just as Levinas asserted that because the self is constituted only through its relationship to the other, we are ethically compelled to that other's care. It will come as no surprise, as the Care Collective conclude, that care and capitalist market logics cannot be reconciled. A failure to acknowledge that inexorable collaboration leads to denialism. As Sousa et al. Explains, the denial of systemic violence and complicity in harm, the denial of the limits of the planet, the denial of entanglement, and the denial of the depth and magnitude of the problems that we face. It is this denialism and the incongruities within it that we must first draw attention to so that we may move beyond them. To ignore them is to highlight humanity's capacity for uncaring, that we extend beyond the anthropos to more than human entanglements, as Anna Singh identifies in agribusiness plantations. We coerce plants to grow without the assistance of other beings, including fungi in the soil. We replace fungally supplied nutrients with fertilizers obtained from the mining and chemical industries with their trails of pollution and exploitation. Our capacity for uncaring begins in anthropocentric entanglements, such as those between the global north and south, which is just an equally colonial reformation of the concepts of developing country and notions of first and third worlds. As Povinelli explains, recycling has not meant repurposing waste into new products, but rather moving waste from affluent areas to the global south or far indigenous north. What we see here is a failure in responsibility that Guillard claims is a refusal to impose predetermined ethical solutions, an attempt to instead be continuously responsive to the needs and interests of relational partners. Druidry is of particular interest in this area due to its pre-Fordist conceptualization that has emphasized the natural environment over forms of hierarchic and thus late liberal formations, specifically in areas of agriculture, if only for personal consumption. To be responsible is to acknowledge that the solutions under a capitalist neoliberal worlding cannot work. and that contemporary Druidry might prove one mechanism for awakening others to alternative modes of worlding that centre the more than human. The articulation of more than human entanglements I draw from is Maria Delabert-Cassa's description of the web within permaculture ethics of care. She explains that this care is based on the perception that we are embedded in a web of complex relationships in which personal actions have consequences for more than ourselves and our kin. And conversely, these collective connections transform our personal life. The ecological perception of being part of the earth, a part that does its specific share of care, requires Earth not to be a spiritually or visionary image, for example Gaia, but is felt, that our bodies are conceived materiality as part of it. This is where Druidry falls short, as Gaian symbology appears throughout its various interpretations. Yet it's a flexible model that allows for the responsibility that ecological encounters require. These forms of more than human entanglements rub up against those that exist within frameworks of neoliberal logic that speak to Timothy Morton's concept of the mesh from the field of object-orientated ontology. Think stockings, he suggests, and graphic design, metals and fabrics. It has antecedents in mask and mass, suggesting both density and deception. By extension, mesh can mean a complex situation or series of events in which a person is entangled, a concatenation of constraining or restricting forces of circumstances, a snare. In other words, his words, it's perfect. Ontologies are modes of worlding based mostly in language, Gaia, object-orientated ontology, etc. And as a result, the non-listening anthropos will exclude the non-speaking more than human. Federico Campagna's work in his book Technic and Magic elucidates this problem well by explaining the founding hypostases or unwritten rules of our current reality system, which he calls technic, that relies on absolute language, that which seeks to diminish at the linguistic level all things. For example, trees become lumber, become resource, humans become labour, become resource. He suggests a hopeful move towards an alternative cosmogony of being, which he calls magic, which relies on the ineffability of life beyond language. Magic as a route towards ineffability is the very reason I landed on Druidic practice, with its mythic origins and ecological pre-Fordist inclinations that disrupt Morton's perfection. Incorporating what Morton himself suggests as a possible solution to our current inattentive state, that of horology, or the study of time. Capitalist economies, as an anthropocentric discourse, cannot factor in the very thing that ecological thought and politics require: non-human beings and unfamiliar timescales. Formulations of temporal experience serve as hypostases of our reality system, and there are 4 temporal formulations that serve as probably the most articulated for those of us here today. They are the academic year, the tax year, the Gregorian calendar, and the seasonal calendar. Each of these articulations pushes to prescient different logics, different worldings. The academic and the tax year fit comfortably within the late liberal and neoliberal logics discussed earlier, while the seasonal calendar is enmeshed in anthropocentric, not more than human experiences of weather and climate. Other temporal experiences exist, of course, from evolutionary time, geological time, and Hannah Ardent's vacant time. Yet none of these temporal articulations place as their hypostases the web of more than human entanglements that the others disavow. Without the grounding in our very understanding of time's progress, our relationship with the more than human will always be an afterthought. Such articulations do exist, however, such as the Maori lunar calendar, that Rangi Matamura beautifully discusses in their chapter Matariki and the Decolonisation of Time. Of particular interest to my own research is the Druidic eightfold wheel of the year, which sets at its heart the experience of the more than human. The holidays of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane and Lunasar are centred on pre-Fordist agricultural practices, and in their very formulation, articulations of more than human awareness. To live by the eightfold wheel is to understand the more than human at the level of temporal formulation. Yet beyond these articulations is a very real sense that time is running out, and the paradoxical incongruence that such an awareness brings. As Morton suggests, the present moment is swallowing the future as fast as new features are invented. Presented with this threat of eschatological apocalypsis, my performance research practice is centred on retroactivating indigenous practices to which I'm native, to counteract the environmental slow violence and incongruence of post-Fordist mediatised late liberalism. As Amitav Ghosh suggests in The Great Derangement, let us make no mistake, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture, and thus the imagination. Culture generates desires for vehicles and appliances, for certain kinds of gardens and dwellings that are among the principal driving forces of the carbon economy. The stories we have constructed onto and about capitalist goods can quite easily be reformulated towards the more than human, as Ghosh suggests in his later work, The Nutmeg's Curse. The tree of the Bandas may have flourished in other lands, but nowhere on earth other than Maluku do people still sing songs about the nutmeg and weave it into their memories of their ancestors and their lost homeland. Everywhere else, the nutmeg is just a commodity, a resource. It has no meaning in excess of its utility. Nobody sings songs about the nutmeg in Barbados or Connecticut or Edinburgh. From within my research discipline of performance studies, the retroactivation of an oral tradition of more than human mythology is the perfect tool by which we may amplify the more than human at the level of the ontological and begin the move from language towards ineffability. This may seem paradoxical, to begin in language towards ineffability, but as Campagna displays, the world is composed both of completely ineffable and linguistically approachable dimensions. One particular rationale for employing British druidry is that indigenous cosmogonies do not share modernity's ontological foundation of separability. Everything becomes connective, and returns us to Matamur's descriptions of the Matariki. The variance in the sun's position was interpreted as the perpetual journey of the sun backwards and forwards between his two wives. They continue that this knowledge system was transmitted via oral traditions such as traditional song, proverbs, and incantations. There is a clear need to move beyond anthropocentric stories, as Dorian et al. Suggests. Only human stories will not serve anyone in a period shaped by escalating and mutually reinforced processes of biosocial destruction. Our foundational story telling needs to reincorporate and privilege the more than human, not as children's stories, but as real and true foundations to human temporal experience. As Catherine Youssef explains in A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, origins draw borders that define inclusion and exclusion, as does the absolute language of Campagna's technic reality system. Origin myths have, since the development of nation-states, been weaponized as nationalistic constructs, as has the reformulation of a mythical druidic practice, and thusly the incongruities of the incongruities surfaces. As the world moves towards decolonization, so too can we de-anthropose our stories and myths for the purpose of more than human inclusion. Césaire suggests that colonization equals thingification. If true, then decolonization can also mean ineffability. As Derrida would have it, nothing that can be found in the end is not already pre-configured in the origin. Origins configure and pre-configure the possibility of narratives of the present, the Anthropocene in the making. What our new more than human myths will have as their strength, and in turn a way to avoid the nationalistic implications of retroactivated origin stories, is an awareness of the finitude of an anthropocentric world, one we may be even too late to save, as non-linear human-caused ecological violence takes effect. These retroactivated myths can provide us a possible future, one that has not already been consumed, digested, and shat out on the global south and far indigenous north, but one that sings, as Anat Singh provides us through her notion of polyphony over the more common assemblage. Music, she calls it, in which autonomous melodies intertwine. She asks, if we want to know what makes places livable, we should be studying polyphonic assemblages, gatherings of ways of being. Assemblages are performances of livability. Yet this is where the incongruities of contemporary experience reveal themselves. The possibilities of druidry, that is also neoliberal weaponized middle-class mindfulness, or romantic era Welsh nationalist product, materialist mesh over silk-spun webs, building a mythology of the now for a future that we may have already consumed, bringing attention to those things hidden by the very worlding of technic. The speaker's presentation has reached its end. The soothing wave of digital anesthesia has revealed itself as the toxic sludge of the digital age, the incongruities of the incongruities of the incongruities, distracting us from the hard work that needs doing, to change the very cultural rules of our age, to move from absolute language to ineffable polyphony.